Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Memvav. One Mem Hey Amr Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara. Amr Le'ah Bailer of Yosef. Now the Gemara is referring back to the discussion between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish regarding a menorah, a candelabra on Shabbos. According to Rish Lakish, if it's a heavy menorah, a menorah that needs 2 hands to handle it, it is considered to be muktzah, even according to Reb Shimon. Even according to Reb Shimon, who does not hold of muktzah machmas isser. Nevertheless, this menorah, since it is meant to stay positioned fixed in one place, Adam koivei lo makom, a person specifies a location for this menorah and leaves it there. It's not meant to be carried around. Therefore, it doesn't have a teres kli, it doesn't have a din of a vessel, of a utensil, and it's considered to be muktzah, even according to Reb Shimon. Rabbi tells us this applies whether it's a large or small menorah, whether it can be handled with 1 hand or needs 2 hands. In either case, it has the same halacha. A menorah is considered to be muktzah, even according to Reb Shimon, because one generally specifies a location to place this menorah there and doesn't really move it around, so it doesn't have a din of a kli and is muktzah. Amalei Abayler of Yosef, is this so? That this element, this factor, kriyas makom, the fixed location, it gives it a din of muktzah? How could that be? Varei kilas chasanim, a bridal canopy. This was sort of a canopy they put on the beds of the chasan. The adam kabelei makom, a person certainly fixes specifies a location for this canopy. It's meant to stay there. It's not meant to be carried around. Nevertheless, we find va'amar shmo b'shum Reb Chia kilas chasan mutal l'ta'isa. One may spread it out on Shabbos, mutal l'farka b'Shabbos. One can take it down on Shabbos. But Rashi explains there's no problem of oil creating a canopy, a roof here, because there's no width of a tefach there. There's no flat area which is tefach, and therefore it doesn't have a din of oil. One has no problem spreading it out on Shabbos, taking it down on Shabbos. So evidently it's not muktzah, even though it's meant to remain in place. So we see that the factor of kviyas makom does not influence the muktzah aspect. Ella Amar Abaye, says Abaye, I'll tell you the reason why the menorah is asur. Why can a person not handle a menorah on Shabbos? We're speaking about a specific type of menorah. We're speaking about bishal chulyos. The menorah is made of sections. It's comprised of parts. If so, says Rashi, there's a chashash, there's a concern that perhaps this menorah, when he's carrying this menorah, Shema Tipol, this is the first narrow line of Rashi, Shema Tipol v'sisparek, perhaps he'll drop it, and it will come apart, V'yach zirena, and go and reattach the sections. V'nimtza, says Rashi, Oiseh keli, he's going to be making a keli. This is a malacha of Makabeh Patish, one of the 39 malachas, putting the finishing touches on something, on a kli. So this is a malacha on Shabbos. So that's the concern here. Don't handle the menorah which is made of parts of chulyos, because it might come apart and he might be inclined to go ahead and reattach it and do a malacha. So once again, Rish Lakish tells us that only a heavy menorah has this concern, but a small menorah is okay. Rabbi Yochanan says either way it's asur. The Gemara is going to try to analyze the difference of opinion based on this explanation. Says Gemara, if this is the reason, if we're speaking about a menorah shel chulyos, my time at the Reb Shimon Lakish the Shari. Why does Reb Shimon Lakish allow one to handle the menorah shel chulyos when it's a small menorah? What difference does it make if it's large or small? The same concern applies to a small just as it applies to a large one. It says the Gemara, my chulyos. Well, what do we mean when we said the word chulyos? We didn't mean actually that it's comprised of parts. Ke'ein chulyos, it appears as though it's made of sections. The isbei chidki, because it has these grooves, and it has the appearance as though it's a combination of various sections. Okay, says more. Let's analyze the machlokes in light of this latest interpretation. So speaking about a candelabra that has grooves, hilkach. Therefore, chulyos. So a candelabra that actually has chulyos, sections. Indeed, it's irrelevant. Ben gdoila, ben ktana, surah, tatla. One may not handle it whether it's large or small, because there's the same concern by a small one as there is with a large one. He might go ahead and reassemble it on Shabbos. Gedoila nami, the isba chitki, a large one, which has these grooves, which perhaps appear as though these are sections. one cannot handle that as well, according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Why? Gezeira atu gedola dechulios. There's a concern that one may confuse it with a large menorah, which indeed is made of sections. So as Rashi says, man dechazi, one who takes a look, the onlooker, the observer who sees this large menorah with the grooves, doesn't really have sections, it has grooves. Sabar, he will think, shal prakimu, that it's made of sections. And he'll go ahead and confuse the two, just as he sees somebody handling this. He might go ahead and handle the menorah with the actual sections, and in that case, there's a real concern that he might come to do malacha. So all agree that a large menorah, which has these grooves, is asur. Ki pligi, when then is there the disagreement? Biktana de isba chitki, a small menorah that has these grooves. Marsa v'gazrina. So Rabbi Yochanan holds, even in a small menorah, the gzeira applies. The Chachamim just apply their gzeira broadly. We know this from many places. The gzeiras Rabban were applied with the concept of like plug, don't differentiate between one and the other. It's a broad gzeira so that it takes hold and that it endures. So now, although there's a real difference between a gdoila and a ktana, because once again the gdoila was generally made of sections. They didn't make one huge menorah. They would make different sections and put them together. So therefore, by the gdoila, indeed, there's a real concern that even when it only has grooves, perhaps one is going to think these are sections, because a gdoila is generally built in that manner. However, a ktana, which is not generally built using sections, perhaps that's different. Says Rabbi Yochanan, no. Mar Savar, Rabbi Yochanan holds gazrina, the gzeira applies to a ktana as well. Even if it only has grooves, it is asur. O Mar Savar, Rish Lakish holds loy gazrina, that we're not geyser, we don't apply a gzeira to the ktana that has grooves. It's only the gdoila where the Chacham applied the gzeira to, because the gdoila is generally built using sections, so even when it only has grooves, there's a concern that one may confuse the two. He may think that, oh, that one has sections and he's still handling it, apparently that's mutter. He may confuse the grooves with the sections. However, by the ktana, which isn't generally built in a manner of combining sections together, there's no reason to be geyser when this specific menorah doesn't have sections and only has grooves. So in summary, regarding tiltul menorah, if the menorah is comprised of chulyos, different sections and parts, all agree one cannot handle this menorah regardless of its size, regardless of its weight, whether it's large or small. But there's a concern that it might drop and the sections will come apart, and he will perhaps go ahead and be inclined to reassemble the menorah and do malacha. What about a menorah that does not have actual sections but appears to have sections? It's made with chitki, these grooves. So menorah gedola, all agree it's asur, because generally the larger menorahs are built using sections. So a person seeing this menorah will perhaps confuse it with a section menorah, and therefore the Chacham applied a gzeira to every menorah gedola which has either sections or merely grooves. However, a menorah ktana that has merely grooves, that is where the machlokes applies. Rabbi Yochanan says that's asur because of a gzeira atu chulyos, and the Chachamim did not differentiate between a large and a small menorah. Rish Lakish tells us, yes, there's a big difference. A large one is generally made of sections. However, a small one is mutar because there's no reason for Chacham to apply the gzeira. A small menorah is generally not made of sections. So indeed, if this menorah doesn't really have sections, it merely has grooves, there's no concern and there's no gzeira, it's mutar to handle on Shabbos. Now Tosfos points out that actually the Gemara later on Daf Kuf Chal Gimel does tell us that there are some items that have a muktzah status based on the fact that Adam Kollel Hamakim, that the owner designates a specific place for these items. And here in the Gemara, we conclude that that is not a reason to make something muktzah. Says Tosfos, there's a difference between various items. And now Gemara, the kviyas makim is not definite or absolute. Therefore, this type of kviyas makim doesn't have the power to make muktzah. However, in that Gemara of Kuf Chav Gimel, we're speaking about items where the designation of the makim, the kviyas makim by the owner, is more absolute. It's more definite, and therefore that kviyas makim, where it's meant to really stay in its place, it nullifies its keli status, its heter status, and therefore the shimush on Shabbos with those items are us. Continues the Gemara. Okay, so we had a discussion before regarding the halacha l'maisa. What does the halacha follow? Does it follow Rabbi Yehuda's shita and muktzah, Rabbi Shimon's shita and muktzah? So actually we had a machlokes amarayim between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon Levi. The Gemara told us that according to Rabbi Yochanan, halacha is Rabbi Yehuda. who holds of muktzah, machmas isser. So if something is designated to be used for an isser, it's muktzah, and even if that only happened during Ben Hashmashos, the isser muktzah extends throughout the entire Shabbos. According to Rabbi Shua ben Levi, he holds halacha Reb Shimon, who does not subscribe to muktzah. To certain types of muktzah machmas isser, he doesn't hold of the muktzah Ben Hashmashos extends throughout the whole Shabbos, etc. Says the Gemara, is that so? The Rabbi Yochanan adopts Shitas Rabbi Yehuda with regard to muktzah. Continues the Gemara, Mi Omar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi, is that so? The Omar Rabbi Yochanan, did Rabbi Yochanan tell us? Halacha Kistam Mishnah, went to follow. The Stam Mishnah, halacha follows the Mishnah which was stated anonymously. So apparently the fact that the Rebbe HaKadosh who composed the Mishnayos, he states the Mishnah without a name, apparently he's implying to us that we're meant to follow the halacha in this Mishnah. So Rabbi Yochanan gives us the formula. Halacha Kistam Mishnah. Halacha follows an anonymous Mishnah. Utzanan, we learned in a Mishnah, which was stated anonymously, that Muchni Shala, referring back to that Mishnah we had on Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis, this Agola Shal Eitz, this coach, which had a Muchni, which has a wheel. So the question is the Muchni considered to be part and parcel, integral part of the Agola or not? So it depends. Bizman Shi Nishmetes, if this Muchni, if this wheel is removable, then it's considered to be a separate entity. Ein Chibrula, it's not really connected to it with regard to Hilchos Tumah V'Tara. Veinim Dedes Ima, it's not really measured together with the coach with regard to the halacha of if it's a large kli that can contain 40 sa, then it's not considered to be a kli, it has din of oil. So this muchni doesn't go into that calculation. Veinim Atzelas Ima Ba'il HaMeis, if there's a kli in this coach, so the kli is protected from the oil HaMeis, from the mace, because this coach has a din of an oil. Now, if something's hanging over the edge of the coach, of the agola, and the muchni is blocking it, is the muchni considered to be part of the oil? So no, if it's nishmetes, if it's separable from the agola, then it has its own life, its own identity, and it doesn't combine with doesn't join together with the coach to be matzal the kelim for oil hames. And finally, and this is what pertains to us right here, vein goyrin oisa b'Shabbos. One cannot drag this wheel on Shabbos, bizman sheish aleha mois, when there is money present on this wheel, because now this wheel is considered to be a basis, a basis, l'davar aser, to the money which is muktzah. Says the Gemara, the fact that the Mishnah stipulates that the only way the muchni is muktzah is if there is money actually present on it right now. This implies, evidently, if there's no money right now, then it's mutter. Afagav, dahabu aleo ben hashmashos. Although perhaps there was money on this muchni ben hashmashos, that doesn't make it muktzah for the entire Shabbos. We look at the present moment. If there's money on it, then it's muktzah, because the money is muktzah machmas gufay, has no practical use on Shabbos. The wheel is serving the money; it's its basis, its support. However, the fact that there would be money on it ben hashmashos, but now is no longer there, that wouldn't constitute muktzah, because muktzah is not dependent on ben hashmashos. So apparently, whose shita are we following? We're following Shitas Reb Shimon, who does not subscribe to this halacha of iskatzoy ben hashmashos. When something is muktzah ben hashmashos, that muktzah status extends throughout the entire Shabbos. So this seems to be a contradiction of steer in Rabbi Yochanan. First we have Rabbi Yochanan who tells us halacha like Rabbi Yehuda. Then we have another Rabbi Yochanan who tells us we're meant to follow the Stam Mishnah. And this Mishnah here tells us that there's no concept of muktzah. We don't follow Rabbi Yehuda's concept of muktzah. This Mishnah seems to be reflecting the sheet of Reb Shimon. Says the Gemara, Omar of Zera, I'll give you an answer. Tehei Mishnah Seinu. We must interpret our Mishnah. Shelo Yehoyu Aleh Mois Kol Ben Hashmashos. The Mishnah, when the Mishnah says that there's no money on the muchni, it doesn't mean at the present moment. It means to say that during Ben Hashmashos as well, there was no money on this muchni. So it's not there now, nor was it there during Ben Hashmashos. I'm interpreting the Mishnah as follows because I don't want to break the words of Rabbi Yochanan. I want to accommodate the words of Rabbi Yochanan so that there won't be a steer or contradiction in the words of Rabbi Yochanan. Therefore, I interpret the Mishnah to mean that there's no money on the muchni now or during Ben Hashmashos as well, because otherwise it will be muktzah in accordance with Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Continues the Gemara. On Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Pamachas. There was once a time that Holach Rebbe So he went to this place, v'hoira, and he ruled as follows. B'menoira ki Reb Shimon ben Ner. Sounds like a riddle. So he gave a cryptic ruling. V'hoira b'menoira ki Reb Shimon ben Ner. So he applied a halacha to menorah, which seemed similar to the halacha of Reb Shimon by Ner. What is the halacha of Shimon by Ner? We know that according to Reb Shimon, even a Ner which was already used, a Ner Yashin, is not muktzah. Reb Shimon does not subscribe to muktzah machmas mius, muktzah machmas isur. So this statement of the Gemara, or Reb Shimon Levi's statement, that Rabbi ruled b'menorah ki Reb Shimon ben Ner, Rabbi Shimon Levi's statement is a bit cryptic. We're trying to figure out what it means. It says the Gemara, they asked the question, what does this mean? Let's figure out, let's try to decipher this riddle. What did Shimon Levi mean when he said Rabbi was Hoira b'menorah ki Reb Shimon ben Ner? Iboilu. Hoira b'menorah ki Reb Shimon ben Ner lehetera. Did he mean one thing? It was one ruling, one Hoira, one psak, that Rabbi applied a leniency by menorah. One can handle a candelabra on Shabbos, just like Reb Shimon is matir the Ner. So it was one heter, one psak. He was matir menorah, just as Reb Shimon is matir by Ner. Again, Hoira b'menorah. Did he apply a heter with regard to handling a menorah on Shabbos, just like the heter ki Reb Shimon ben Ner lehetera? Oidilma, perhaps this is what Reb Shimon Levi means to say. Hoira b'menorah li'isura, that Rabbi ruled an isser with regard to handling a menorah on Shabbos. That's number one. The second psak was, the second ruling was, Reb Shimon ben Ner lehetera. He also happened to rule like Reb Shimon with regard to handling a ner on Shabbos, and he was matir it. So we're trying to figure out this cryptic statement of Reb Shimon Levi. What do you mean to say when he related a story? Rabbi was Hoira b'menorah ki Reb Shimon ben Ner. What do you mean to say? Was it one halacha, one hoira, one psak? Then in both cases, a menorah and by Ner, he was matir? Or perhaps these are two different items. He was matir. He prohibited. He applied an isser to menorah. One cannot handle a candelabra on Shabbos. That's number one. And number two, actually, with regard to Ner, he was matir like Reb Shimon. Teiku. So this was left unresolved. So basically we have two uncertainties. One with regard to menorah, was he matir or was he iser? And one with regard to his own opinion by Ner. According to the first version, it seems like he was not matir the Ner like Reb Shimon. He just said that a menorah is mutter just like Reb Shimon's opinion by Ner, but he himself, we're not sure what he holds by Ner. According to the second version, he was matir by Ner. He said menorah is also, but Ner is mutter. So again, we're uncertain regarding Rebbe's opinion by A, menorah, whether it's asur or mutter, or B, by Ner, or if it's asur or mutter. Continues the Gemara, Rav Malchia, Ikla lebei Rav Simloi. So he came to the home of Rav Simloi, v'tiltil shraga, and he moved the Ner. Rashi says, Ner shakava, so a lamp where the flame had already gone out. So Rav Malchia handled it. He didn't consider it to be muktzah. V'ikped Rav Simloi. Rav Simloi objected. Apparently Rav Simloi held like Rav Yehuda, that once there's muktzah ben hashmashes, then the ner remains muktzah throughout Shabbos. Or once the ner is mos, let's say we're speaking about a ner shel cheres, so muktzah machasmias is aser. However, Rav Malchai appeared to follow the sheet of Reb Shimon and didn't consider these things to be muktzah. Continues the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi Glila, Rabbi Yosi from Kollel, he too ikla, he visited la'asr Rabbi Yosi B'Chanina, the locale of Rabbi Yosi B'Chanina, tiltil shraga v'ikped, Rabbi Yosi B'Chanina. So he also handled the lamp. He didn't consider it to be muktzah. V'ikped Rabbi Yosi B'Chanina, Rabbi Yosi B'Chanina objected. Continues the Gemara, Rabbi Vo, a story regarding Rabbi Vo, who was actually a talmid of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon Levi. Now we know there's a machlekes, a disagreement between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon Levi on how to follow. Do we follow Rabbi Yehuda, the Islam Muktzah, or Rabbi Shimon, the Leslie Muktzah? As we said earlier, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we adopt Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. We hold of Muktzah. According to Rabbi Shimon Levi, Muktzah is mutter. So now the Talmud, the student of both Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon Levi, he conducted himself as follows. Rabbi Vo, who was their Talmud, Ki ikla la'asrei Rabbi Shimon Levi, when he came to the location of Shimon Levi, Hamatal Shraga, he indeed would move the lamp. And according to Shimon Levi's Shita, that we follow Reb Shimon's lenient approach to Muktzah. However, Ki Ikla, La'as Rabbi Yochanan, when he came to the place of Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Yav Matal Shraga, at that place he did not move the lamp. Says in Ramanav Shach, how does this work out? How does this make sense? What does he hold? If Reb Abba adopts Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, let him follow Rabbi Yehuda all the way. If Reb Shimon Svirli, if he follows Reb Shimon's opinion, Reb Shimon, let him follow Reb Shimon all the way. How come in one place he did one thing, and the other place he did just the opposite? It says in La'olam, certainly Reb Shimon Svirli, he himself, he adopted the halacha of Reb Shimon, the opinion of Reb Shimon, that it's not muktzah. And therefore, when he came to the location, to the locale of Rabbi Shimon Levi, he would move this lamp. On account of the honor and respect towards Rabbi Yochanan. That's why when he came to Rabbi Yochanan's place, he would conduct himself more stringently and he would avoid handling the ner, in accordance with the opinion and the view of Rabbi Yochanan. Continues the Gemara, Omar Rabbi Yehuda. Now we're going to discuss Shitas Reb Shimon. Says Rabbi Yehuda, Shraga de Mishcha, a lamp, an oil lamp, Shoril Tatula. According to Reb Shimon, one can go ahead and move around this lamp on Shabbos. It's not muktzah. Why? Because it's not mos, it's not really repulsive. Although perhaps it's a bit grimy and greasy, since it absorbed the oil. We're speaking about an ner shel cheres, an earthenware lamp. Nevertheless, we could still have some use of it. Unfortunately, say you could use it. It could put some oil on there to use for anointing oneself. So it still has some sort of use aside from the kindling the lamp. So it has a heter function even on Shabbos. Therefore, according to Reb Shimon, one can move around this shraga de mishcha, this lamp which was used with oil. However, the nafta, a lamp which was fueled using neft, which is a very foul-smelling fuel, kerosene. So it's a product of that zephes. It smells awful. So this type of lamp, also tatula, one cannot move it on Shabbos, even according to Reb Shimon, because it has no practical use on Shabbos. The only thing it's going to be used for is to kindle it, and that certainly can't be done on Shabbos. Even according to Reb Shimon, it doesn't really have a status of kli, since it has no practical use on Shabbos, on account of its foul odor. So that's Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. A chiddush, even according to Reb Shimon, a shraga, the nifta, is considered to be so repulsive and doesn't really have any shimush on Shabbos, and therefore it is muktzah, because the only thing you'll use it for is to light with it. Rabbi, Rav Yosef, Damar Tavayu, they both contend that no, the nafta nami tatula, even this lamp, which was used with neft and it smells awful, is still considered to be a kli with regard to tiltal on Shabbos, according to Reb Shimon. The Gemara soon will give us the reason for this. Apparently it's still suitable for something. Continues the Gemara with the story. Rav Avya, Ikla lebe Rava, he visited the home of Rava. Havo me'isan beikari betina. So his shoes or socks were sullied with mud. Asivi apuria, Rav Avya didn't hesitate to put his sullied feet asivi apuria on the bed, apuria, kame de Rava, in front of Rava. Ikpid Rava, Rava objected. He didn't like what he was saying. And Borlitz Urei, he wanted to unsettle Rav Avya, and he chose to challenge him with the following question. Amalei, so we're going to have a nice pshat from the Chlam Sefer on this whole dialogue. So in any case, Rava wanted to be Matzayrim. Rashi said, let's uri b'she'elis, with questions. So he challenged him as follows. Amalei, he told him, my timer, how are you going to explain the view of Rav Yosef? Rav Yosef, and Tavayu, they both contend that shraga the nifta, even a lamp which was used with kerosene and has this foul odor, nami shara tatule. How are you going to explain that? That even this type of lamp can be moved on Shabbos, according to Reb Shimon? What could it be used for aside from kindling, aside from lighting? Why is it considered to be a kli heter on Shabbos? Amar lei. So Rav Avi responded, I'll tell you why. Hoil v'chazya, it's still right, it's still fit, it's still suitable for l'chsuyi b'mana, to cover with it a kli, to put it on top of a kli, use it as a lid. So even though its primary use is not fit for Shabbos, meaning you're not going to use it for storage on account of its smell, you certainly can't light it on Shabbos. So its ikar shimush is non-existent on Shabbos. Nevertheless, it still has some sort of secondary use, to use it as a lid. So even though this is mere trivial type of use, it still is considered to be a kli on account of that shimush, and one may move it on Shabbos, according to Rabbi Shimon. Okay, says Rabbi, is that so? This type of insignificant use grants an item, will give it a Torah's kli and not make it muktzah? Elamiyata, according to you. If so, called tzroyer shebechatzer metalton. One can go ahead and handle any type of pebble out in the courtyard, a rock. Why? For the same reason. Hoil v'chazya, since it's fit, it's suitable. L'chsuyi b'maran, to place it over a kli, to use that as a lid. If this type of trivial use is considered significant enough to grant an item a Torah's kli, what about every pebble out in the street, out in the chutzner? Amar lei. So Rabbi says, 1 second. Let's differentiate between the two things. This lamp, Ika Torah's Kli Aleh. It has a Torah's Kli, meaning it's a utensil, it's a vessel. So therefore, even though it lost its primary use on Shabbos, it's a foul-smelling Kli, he's not going to use it for storage. He certainly can't use it to light with it on Shabbos. Nevertheless, since it still has somewhat of a shimush, as trivial, as insignificant as it may be, it still retains its status of kli. It doesn't lose it entirely. It still holds on to it because it could still be used for something, even merely as an object used as a lid on top of a kli. However, these pebbles, hani leka Torah's kli alayu. They never had a Torah's kli. They never had a din keli. They weren't considered to be a utensil, and therefore, you can't go ahead and grant the pebble a kli status as a result of the fact that it can be used as a lid on top of a kli. That's not significant enough to give it, to endow it with a din kli. Therefore, it's muktzah. So once again, when something was a kli and lost its shimush, but still maintains something of a shimush, it still could hold on to its status of kli, and it's not muktzah. But when something begins from zero, you can't give it a Torah's kli simply on account of this shimush kal, this type of trivial shimush, to place it, to use that as a lid on top of a kli. It doesn't have a din kli as a result of that shimush. Like Tanya, haven't we learned this type of concept? That once something has a Torah's kli, it won't lose it, since it is still somewhat usable. We learned hashirayim, these are the bracelets, vanazam, nose rings, vatabois rings. Although, as Rashi explains, the Chacham made a gzera that a woman may not wear these jewelry items out in the Shus Rabbim or even in the Chatzar, out of concern that she might take it off to show a friend and carry it in Shus Rabbim. So although one may not wear it, it may not use it, derech tashmisha, derech malbush, the way it's ordinarily used and worn, nevertheless, it doesn't lose its kli status. It's not muktzah. Harayein kechol hakelim. They're equated with all other types of utensils on a Talmud Chatzar that can be handled and moved around the Chatzar. Although one cannot wear this jewelry derech malbush, the way it's ordinarily worn. V'marula matam. Why indeed is it not muktzah? For this exact reason, hoil, because v'ika Torah's kli alein, because there's still a Torah's kli on them. They never lost their kli status, their utensil status. These things were kalim. So even though you cannot wear them, derech malbush, due to the gzera of the Chachamim, however, since it still has some sort of shimush, it's still ready for shimush. Perhaps you can use it to cover a kli, etc. It still has a use on Shabbos, so it still retains its Torah's kli, and it's not muktzah. Same thing here, says the Gemara Hanami, with regard to this shraga de nifta, this lamp, which was fueled using this kerosene, although its primary uses are not applicable on Shabbos. Nevertheless, it's still not muktzah, according to Rabbi Shimon, hoil v'ika Torah's kli aleh, since it still retains its kli status. Why? Because you can use it as an object, as a lid on top of a kli. So this was an obvious response to Rava, and as a result, Omar of Nachman bar Yitzchak, he exclaimed, Brich Rachmana Baruch Hashem, to like Sifei Rava, the Rav Avya, that Hashem did not allow Rava to shame and embarrass Rav Avya. Hashem granted Rav Avya the right words to respond to Rava's challenge, and he did not end up being shamed or embarrassed. So in summary, regarding the halacha of tiltul, according to Reb Shimon, so it depends. A ner shel mateches, a metal, a lamp, all agree, is mutter, regardless of what was used inside that ner, because it could be cleaned and washed out. It doesn't absorb the smell like a ner shel cheres. It doesn't absorb the mius, and therefore it's mutter. And although it was burning during Ben Hashmashos, according to Reb Shimon, we know Leslie Muktzah Machmas Isser. When something was unfit during Ben Hashmashos, it does not retain its Muktzah status throughout the entire Shabbos. What about a ner shel cheres, an earthenware lamp, which absorbed the oil, which was used with oil? It's mutter as well, because according to Reb Shimon, it still has some shimush on Shabbos. One could perhaps fill it with oil to use for anointing oneself. So it still has a din of a kli and it's mutter. Now what about this ner shel cheres, which was filled with nafta, this kerosene, this foul-smelling fuel? We have a machlekes. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even Reb Shimon agrees it's aser. Why? Because this thing is only suitable for adlaka, for nothing else, on account of its repulsiveness, and therefore it doesn't have a din of a kli heter on Shabbos. According to Rabbi Rav Yosef, it's mutter. Why? Because although you won't use it to fill it and to store in it, but you can still use it to place it as a lid on top of a kli, as we find by the tachshitin, these items of jewelry. Although midrabanan, an isha may not wear them on Shabbos out in the chutz or the street, nevertheless they're still not muktzah because they still have a teres kli, and they're still roi for some sort of use on Shabbos. Now the Chassam Sofer has a very nice piece to explain this whole dialogue between Rava and Rav Avya. He says that this whole incident of Rav Avya placing his feet on the bed, etc., and this dialogue that ensued is really based on a halachic discussion later in the Masechta, where Rava holds, Rava, who is the host, he holds that even a small piece of cheres, a shard of earthenware, which is sitting in the chatzar, according to Rava, it's not muktzah. Why? Because it still has some function. You can use it, for instance, to wipe away mud, wipe the mud off his shoes. Therefore, it's still considered to be somewhat of a kli, and it's not muktzah on Shabbos. Rav Avya objected to this halacha. Therefore, Rav Avya put his sullied shoes on the bed to demonstrate his disagreement with Rava's chiddush. No, a kli cheres, a piece of cheres, a shard of pottery, is muktzah. The fact that you can use it to clean off the mud, it doesn't give it a heter. It's not considered. It doesn't endow it with a teres kli. So therefore, he specifically placed his feet on the bed to demonstrate his disagreement with Rava's shita. So Rava saw an opening. So therefore, he challenged him as follows. He says, "Okay, how are you going to explain the shita of Rabbi Rav Yosef? How come a lamp which was used with kerosene is considered to be a kli, according to Reb Shimon?" Says Rav Avi, very simple, because it can still be used for something. Could use it as a lid, etc. Says Rava, if this type of minimal use, this trivial shimush, is sufficient to grant it a teres kli, if so, what is the difference between the lamp and the piece of cheres sitting in the chatzar? That also can be used for something, for instance, to wipe up the mud off your shoes. So Avi responds, no, there's a big difference between the two, as the Gemara explained, because a lamp is still a kli, and therefore it retains its kli status as long as it's still useful for something. However, a pebble or a piece of cheres, a broken piece of pottery, it's not considered to be a kli, it's not considered to be a utensil. And even if you can figure out some sort of constructive purpose to use it for, it doesn't endow with a teres kli, and it's still muktzah. So this was the whole story with the dialogue. It was based on a halachic discussion. Okay, continues the Gemara. Ramile Abai le Rabbi. Abai asked the following kasha of Rabbi. Tani, we learned in the Brisa. We learned this earlier on Daf Yomi Dalet. The Brisa says as follows: Moisar Hashemen, the leftover oil after the flame already gone out. So the leftover oil in the nair or the ka'ara in the bowl, aser. It's aser, and this is shita of Rabbi Huda, who holds that once muktzah, always muktzah. Since the flame was burning ben hashmashos, and the shemen was part of the muktzah item, it's considered to be muktzah machmas iser, and that muktzah status continues throughout Shabbos. So even after the flame goes out, he cannot benefit from this oil. That's muktzah. Reb Shimon matir. Reb Shimon says no. The fact that it was burning during ben hashmashos, it's irrelevant. If it's useful now, it's not muktzah. And therefore, Reb Shimon says that he can go ahead and actually draw some oil from this nair, from this kara. Alalma says Gemara, apparently, the Reb Shimon leslie muktzah. Reb Shimon does not apply the concept of muktzah in this case. So although it was muktzah ben hashmashos, it doesn't affect its status throughout Shabbos. V'raminu, we're going to ask a kasha. From the following halacha, we find Reb Shimon appears to state otherwise. Reb Shimon says, this is with regards to the halacha of b'chor. The firstborn kosher animal is considered to be a b'chor and needs to either be brought to the Beis HaMikdash as a carbon, or if it has a mum, if a blemish surfaces, in that case one may use the b'chor even outside the Beis HaMikdash. So what happens if a b'chor is here on Yom Tiv, and shechita we know is mutar on Yom Tiv? Can he go ahead and shech the b'chor when he finds a mum, a blemish present on this b'chor on Yom Tiv? Says Reb Shimon, no, he cannot. Reb Shimon Omer, kol she'ein mumai nikar me'erev Yom Tiv. If the mum, the blemish was not visible, was not seen on Erev Yom Tiv, so either it had no mum Erev Yom Tiv, or it had a mum, but it wasn't determined to be a mum kavua, a fixed, a permanent mum, which would allow the shechita. So generally they would have to show it to an expert to rule on this mum, to determine whether it has a din of a legitimate mum, of a legal mum. So if that hadn't taken place on Erev Yom Tiv, kol she'ein mumai nikar Erev Yom Tiv, if the mum was not visible, was not obvious in Erev Yom Tiv, so once again, either it didn't have a mum, or the mum was not yet brought to the expert to determine. Therefore, the behemah at this point is still aser. You can't shech that out of Beis HaMikdash. So even if on Yom Tiv he notices, whoa, there's a mum here, and perhaps an expert took a look at it and said, yes, it's a mum, he can go and shecht it. No, he can't do so. Why? Because ein zeh min hamuchan, it's not prepared for Yom Tiv. Since prior to Yom Tiv, the status of this b'chor was still aser. So although right now there's a mum present, it doesn't change the status. Apparently, says the Gemara, something which was aser during ben hashmashos, like this b'chor, retains its muktzah status, its eidim and hamuchan status throughout the entire Yom Tiv. There seems to be a contradiction between one Reb Shimon and the other Reb Shimon. Between this Reb Shimon that tells us that ben hashmashos determines muktzah, and the Reb Shimon who earlier told us that the moisar hashemen shebener, the leftover oil, is mutter during Shabbos, even though it was muktzah during ben hashmashos. Says the Gemara, hachi hashta. Now, it's very different. Hasam, with regard to the Ner Shabbos, Adam Yoshev Metzape, a person sits and anticipates. He waits for the moment when this flame will go out, and when this lamp and its oil will become available to him. Yoshev Metzape. He's anticipating a Masai Tich Ben Nerei. When is this flame going to go out? So it's a small lamp which he knows, he expects it to go out sometime during Shabbos. So the Mepharshim speak out that even the oil within it, even though perhaps he doesn't expect the oil to remain, he expects the oil to get burnt out. Nevertheless, since his mind is still attached to the kli, he's looking forward, he's waiting for this kli to be available. So his mind is attributed to the oil as well. It's connected somewhat. His attention is focused to the oil within it as well, and therefore it's not muktzah. So even though perhaps it was burning during Ben Hashmashos, and it was considered to be asur on Ben Hashmashos. Nevertheless, since his mind was not diverted from it, he's still waiting for it to become available. So he hadn't rejected it from Shabbos, and when it becomes available, finally he can use it. However, with regard to Bechor, that can't apply. Hacha by Bechor Adam Yoishiv Mitzapeh Masayipu Bamum. Can you say that a person is sitting and waiting, anticipating the moment when a mum will surface on his Bechor? That's not so. Meimar Amar, because the person in his mind thinks there's a far chance, a very small chance, it's a remote possibility that this Bechor will be mutar on Yontif. Why? On account of many reasons. Number one, who says a mum will surface on this Bechor? That's number one. If you suppose, mum will somehow appear, that's still not sufficient to permit the Bechor. Because who says it's going to be a permanent blemish, which allows the Shechita. That's number two. And if you propose that yes, if that already happens, a mum comes and it's a mum kavua, who's to say that a chacham, an expert who want to get himself involved in examining and determining the status of this mum? So on account of all these miyemars, all these considerations, this leads this person to one conclusion: the chances of this Bechor becoming mutar on Yom Tov are very far, very remote, very slight, and therefore he's masiach das. He diverts his attention from this Bechor. He sets it aside. In his mind, it's set aside from Yom Tov, and therefore it's muktzah. So once again, this is the answer to the kasha. By Bechor, since it was asur during Ben Hashmashos, and in the owner's mind, it's very unlikely for the status to change throughout Yom Tov. Therefore, he was masiach das. He diverts his attention from it, and it acquires the status of muktzah throughout the entire Yom Tov, and that won't change because it was set aside completely for this Yom Tov. It was set aside from personal use. However, by the Ner Shel Shabbos, even though during Ben Hashmashos it's burning bright, nevertheless, since the person is Yoishiv Mitzapeh, he anticipates the moment, he expects this Ner to become available, sometime through Shabbos. Therefore, he hadn't been Masiach Das from it, he hadn't diverted his attention from it, he did not shove it aside. It is not muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon. Now, Taisus points out that actually the main factor at Bechor is this last one. Miyemar, who says the mezdakek lechacham, that a chacham, an expert, will avail himself to inspect and check out this mum. Why? Says Taisus, because according to Rabbi Shimon, one is actually not allowed to be baidik a mum Yom Tov. It's equated to making a din, like a court case, which is asur for concern that they might write. So the bdika of a mum on Yom Tov is actually asur. Now we understand the Gemara better. Certainly a chacham has a lot of good reason to hesitate to get himself involved in this bechor, because it's an isser. So therefore, on account of this reason, which Taisus maintains to be the main reason why, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's muktzah, because the owner he doesn't really expect the chacham to show up to check out his mum, because it's also to do so. Therefore, he's been sech das from this bechor. Continue the Gemara. Masiv Rami Barcham. If that's the case, that we apply these terms of mi yemar, who says it's going to be available, who says it's going to become mutter, and that is a reason for the owner to be mesiach das, and it turns the item into muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon as well. If so, how are we going to understand the following Mishnah? The Mishnah says mefirim nidarim b'Shabbos. So a husband can annul the nether of his wife, v'nish'al l'nidarim shein l'tzarech Shabbos, and one may go ahead and be matir nether by the chacham. Nish'al l'nidarim, request a release from his nether. When can they do these things? When can the husband be mefer nether and the chacham be matir nether? Shein l'tzarech Shabbos, when we're dealing with things which are pertinent for Shabbos. For instance, a person that made a nether not to eat on Shabbos, so you can go ahead and request that his nether becomes mutter. Says the Gemara, how can we say that the isha, when she makes a nether, the husband can go ahead and be made for her nether on Shabbos? Apparently, there's some purpose, some benefit to annulling a vow. This will allow her to go eat that item. But how is that so? It would seem to us that this eichel, this food, which she made the nether on, remains muktzah. Why? Leima, let us say as follows: Mi yemar the mizdakik labal. When she made the neder, she utterly rejected the item. Why? Because she didn't know whether the husband will want to get involved in being made for the neder. Miyema, who says the mizdakik labal, that the husband will get involved to remove the neder? If so, it turns out that she was rejecting it completely. She set it aside. So it's a dvar iser, a neder is something which is aser, and she rejected it. She was doichit. She was doichit biyadayim. She actively set it aside, and she was mesiach das from it. If so, it should have a din of muktzah throughout the entire Shabbos. There's no point in annulling the vow. It's still muktzah. So even according to Reb Shimon, the muktzah in this case remains throughout the entire Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Hasam, there is different. Let's follow the formula, the statement, the explanation of Pinchas' name of Rabbi. Every woman who makes a neder, it's not definite, it's not absolute. She's doing it in a manner which is, it's pending, it's dependent on her husband's opinion. The neder is subject to her husband's consent. If so, this neder is not considered to be a dicha b'yadayim. It's not an utter rejection of this food, because the whole neder is merely a pending neder, and therefore it doesn't have a din of dicha b'yadayim. And indeed, as soon as the husband is made for that neder, she can go back to eating this food on Shabbos. Toshma, let's have a raya from the case of mater neder. Nish'olim l'nedarim shel tzarech haShabbos b'Shabbos. So we just said that a person go ahead and request a heter nedarim from the Chacham on Shabbos if indeed there is a tzarech for Shabbos. Says more here too. What is the benefit? What is the purpose? What is the tzarech Shabbos here? He can't eat this item anyways. Why? V'amai lema miyemer de mizdakik lechacham. When he originally made that neder, he didn't know whether or not the Chacham will avail himself, will get himself involved in the neder. If so, he made it aser, and he was doichit, he rejected it biyadayim. He was mesiach das completely from this item, and this muktzah status should remain throughout the entire Shabbos. Says the Gemara, no, it's not considered to be an utter rejection. Hasam iloi mizdakik lechacham. In the case of a Teres Nedarim, even if he can't find a chacham, a sage, to make that Teres Nedarim, sagile b'gimel adyotis. It's sufficient if he finds 3 ordinary people, as the Gemara Nedarim discusses. In some cases, even ordinary people can be matir neder. If so, it's easy to find, and chances are that this will take place, this can take place, and therefore it's not considered to be a rejection, an absolute rejection of the item, and as soon as they make a Teres Nedarim, it's mutter. So this was regards to a Teres Nedarim. But let's go back to Bechor, says the Gemara. Hacha by Bechor, it's considered to be Masiach Das completely, since the Bechor was Asur Der Ben Hashmoshes. And he knew in his mind that chances are no Chacham will go get himself involved doing an Isser to go ahead and examine the Bechor on Yom Tov. Hacham Miyemar, who says the Mizdakik LeChacham, that a Chacham will get involved, and therefore he totally set it aside in his mind, and it has a din of Muktzah throughout the entire Yom Tov. So in summary, according to Reb Shimon, we have 4 cases in the Gemara. Moisar Hashem, the leftover oil, is mutter, because although it is connected to Isser Der Ben Hashmoshes, but the person is anticipating, is waiting for it to become available. Adam Yeshiv Mitzapeh Mas Sayich B'Neira. Therefore, there's no Esach Hadas. By Bechor, there is Esach Hadas, because he's Masiach Das. He says, who says the Chacham is going to come be matter it? By Hafaras Nedarim and Hataras Nedarim, it's mutter, because the Isha is Noida Adas Bala. She's expressing this neder in a pending manner, in a way which is dependent on her husband's consent, and therefore it's not an absolute rejection, it's not an absolute statement. By a Teres Nedarim as well, since it is sufficient to have 3 adyotes, 3 ordinary people to be mated neder, it's not considered to be an absolute rejection of this item, because he knows that is an easy way out. He simply needs to get 3 people to make a Teres Nedarim on Shabbos. Continues the Gemara, Romelei Abaye l'Rav Yosef. So Abaye asked the following kasha of Rav Yosef. Mi amar Rab Shimon. How could Rav Shimon say that kafsa mutal taltala, that after the lamp has already burnt out, the flame is no longer there, one can go ahead and handle and move this near? We imply from there kafsa in only once the flame has gone out. Loi kafsa loi, but otherwise the flame is still burning, he cannot move this near. My time. Why? According to Reb Shimon, why is it asad to move the lamp? Reb Shimon does not hold the muktzah machmas isser. Says the Gemara for another reason. Perhaps while he's holding onto this ner, kafsa, it will inadvertently go out. The fire, the flame will get extinguished. So that's why it's asur. Is that the case? Don't we know that Reb Shimon holds? The Amaru says, Davar, when a person does a maisa, which results in a subsequent malacha taking place, which was not part of his initial kavanah, it was Davar she'ein meskaven. He had no intention to do that secondary malacha. It's mutter. So here, why are we so concerned that the flame will inadvertently go out? It's a Davar she'ein meskaven. The Tanya, as we learned, Reb Shimon Omer, goyred adam, one may drag kisei, a chair, mitei, a bed, v'safsel, a bench, v'vad shlo yiskaven lasas churitz. Even though they're heavy, he can do so as long as he has no intention of making that furrow, of making that churitz. So making a churitz is a malacha of chayfer. But if he has no kavanah to do the chayfer, which is actually a malacha of chayrish, or some say baina, if he has no kavanah for it, it's okay. A davar she'ein meskaven is mutter. So why is the ner different? Why are we so concerned that the flame will go out? It's a davar she'ein meskaven at worst. Says the Gemara, there's a difference between two things. Whenever we have a case, a scenario, we have a case where, let's say theoretically, the person would do it with kavana. He would do this maisa with kavana. It would involve issa deraisa. For instance, the flame, if a person should have kavana to actually put it out intentionally, that would be an issa deraisa, malacha of mechaven. If so, kiloi mechaven, gazer of Shimon, midrabanan. So even in the case where he has no kavana, Rav Shimon does indeed apply an issa derabanan. So that explains why he can't move this burning lamp, because theoretically putting out this flame b'kavana involves a malacha deraisa. So Rav Shimon prohibits midrabanan on account of the fact that he might do shalei b'kavana. However, but in a case, for instance, the dragging of the bench there, even if he should have kavana, he should do it intentionally to make this charitz. It's only Issa Drabanan, as Rashi says, because it's not the ordinary way of digging. One uses a tool, a shovel, etc. It doesn't drag benches to make furrows. Therefore, it's considered Kla'achayat. Not in the ordinary way of doing the malacha, it's only Issa Drabanan. If so, in that case, even if the malacha would have been done with kavana, it would only involve Issa Drabanan at worst. Therefore, in a case where there's no kavana, and it happens inadvertently, like dragging the kisei without kavana to make the furrow, Reb Shimon says it's allowed. So Reb Shimon drops down one level. When we have a Issa Daraisa, he says, well, even Shalei B'Kavana Issa Darabanan. When we have merely Issa Darabanan, there Reb Shimon says, well, Shalei B'Kavana is mutar completely. So this explains why. By dragging the bench, Reb Shimon is matter. By moving this lamp with the burning flame, Reb Shimon says it's awesome. Says more, is that the case? That when we have a Malacha Daraisa, Reb Shimon prohibits when it's done Shalei B'Kavana. Masav Rava, we have a Mishnah which tells us clearly not so. Morichiksus, those garment sellers who would get dressed, who would wear their clothing to display it. What if they have kalayim, they have shatnez? Can they wear it on themselves? Says the Mishnah, yes. And apparently this Mishnah is following Shitz Reb Shimon, who holds Dover Shein Meskaven is mutter. Says the Mishnah, Morichiksus, Morichin Kedarkon, they can wear their clothing and sell it the way they usually do. Ubilvad, provided, Shloi Skaven, you shouldn't have kavana for hana. B'chama in the sun, Me'achama to protect himself from the sun, U'b'kshamim in the rain to protect himself from Me'achshamim. So as long as he doesn't have kavanas hana, it's mutter. V'atznun, however, those discreet people who wanted to distance themselves completely from even appearing to do an isser, so they wouldn't suffice with this. They would go ahead and mafshilin, they would sling it b'makil on a pol achreim behind them. They wouldn't want to wear it. Says the Gemara, V'ocha in this case, if theoretically a person would go ahead and wear this kalayim b'kavana with the intention of having the anah, Isur Daraisa Ika, it involves an Isur Daraisa. Nevertheless, when there's no kavana, Reb Shimon allows even lechatchila. Apparently, this premise of yours that Reb Shimon prohibits even a davar she'ein meskaven when it would theoretically involve Isur Daraisa, apparently that doesn't hold true. So that can't be the reason for the Isser of handling the burning flame according to Reb Shimon. Ella, my Rava says, Rava, I'll give you the answer. Hanach, let aside, leave alone. Liner, the lamp, Shem, and the oil of psila and the wick. Leave it aside, I'll give you the reason for it. Hoyel v'nasim, since they become basis, a basis, a support, l'davar asr, to something which is asr, which is the shalheves, the flame. Since the flame, which is a asr item, as the Ritva explains, this flame, you can't touch the flame on Shabbos because when you touch it, it extinguishes the flame. It's a malacha machab. So this flame is an entity, an inherent entity of Isur. If so, explains the Ritva, everything that's involved in this is considered to be part of the Isur. Since the flame can't burn on its own, it needs the wick, it needs the oil, it needs the nair to hold it all together. They all comprise and become one entity of Isur. Even according to Rabbi Shimon, it's considered to be Asur b'tiltal on Shabbos. Even though Rabbi Shimon does not subscribe to Muktzah Machmas Isur, when something is designated for Isur, for Malacha, it's not considered to be Muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon. But this is different, explains the Ritva. Since the Shalevis is an entity of Isur, one cannot touch the Shalevis. And therefore, everything that's involved in the Shalhevis, the Ner, the Shem, the Psila, all considered to be one entity with the Shalhevis. It's an inherent object of Isser. It's not only designated for Isser, to be used for Isser. It itself is a Chavetz Shal Isser. It itself can't be touched on Shabbos. The flame can't even be touched on Shabbos. It's not just designated for Malachas Isser. Therefore, it's inherently Muktzah, together with everything that takes part in this arrangement. So that indeed is the reason why, according to Shimon, one cannot move around a lamp which is burning on Shabbos. Okay, let's take a quick chazara of today's daf. We began discussing tiltul menorah, a candelabra. The Gemara differentiated between a menorah that has chulias made of parts. It's asur because he might go ahead and assemble it. What about the menorah that merely has those grooves? So if it's a large menorah, it's asur because one may confuse it with a menorah which has the chuliyah, since a large menorah generally is built in that manner. What about a menorah katana that has those grooves? Rabbi Yechon says that too is asur. The Chacham applied the gzera there as well. Rish Lakish says that's mutter because a small menorah isn't generally made with parts. Therefore, the gzera did not apply when it merely has grooves and not parts. Now, what about the metaltal items according to Reb Shimon? So that depends if it's an ershel mateches. It's mutter, because although it was lit during the Shabbos, he doesn't subscribe to Muktzah Isser. When it's a ner shel cheres, a pottery, and it absorbs shemen, it's also mutter, because it's still fit, it's still suitable to use as storage, to put inside oil. What about the ner that was used with naphtha, kerosene, the ner shel cheres, which absorbed this awful smell? According to Rabbi, it's asur, because it's not roy for anything except for lighting. According to Rabbi and Rav Yosef, it's mutter, because it's still suitable to be used as a lid of a kli, just like those pieces of jewelry. The Gemara proceeded telling us that according to Reb Shimon, the leftover oil in an air is mutter because the person is waiting, anticipating its availability on Shabbos. What about a bechor that didn't have a visible moment Erev Yom Tov? It's asur because he's Mesiach Das. He doesn't expect a chacham to come inspect it. Therefore, he sets it aside completely. What about hafaras nadarim? So if the husband knows his wife's nether, she can eat that food because the entire nether originally was made only pending on her husband's consent. Therefore, she didn't actually absolutely reject it from use on Shabbos. The same thing regarding hafaras nadarim. It's also mutter if somebody's mounted the nether, he can use that food because it's easy to get hafaras nadarim. He can simply get 3 ordinary people to matir nether. Therefore, it's not considered to be a tchiyah, and he wasn't Mesiach Das from it on Shabbos. The Gemara concludes, what is the reason why, according to Reb Shimon, one may not handle a ner which is burning? It's because it's a basis. It's forming as a base, as support for a davar asur, which is the shalheves.